James, and I'd like to welcome you to another installment of my video series where I'm talking about my personal study and practice of cartomancy with playing cards. Once again, I'm taking a viewer request, so this is a viewer requested video, and this is for Christina. So Christina, if you're watching, I'm about to answer your particular question. So Christina, who has been watching other video installments of the series, recently reached out to me through a comment thread in one of the videos asking me about spiritual meanings that I would ascribe to the cards. First, she asked me if I could recommend a book that would talk about the spiritual meanings of cards. And I believe this was in direct result of the last video that I did for this series where I talked about my favorite book. I did a walkthrough of the Card Reader's Handbook. So I think as a result of that, we had a conversation about another source material that I find very valuable in my study and practice, which is, it's written in the cards by Dr. Louis Martello. I've talked about this book before. But the challenge is that it's very hard to find. I could only find a copy, a digital copy. I couldn't find, a hard copy or a print copy because it's out of print. That's how old it is. It's out of print. So we were talking about that, and then she circled back and asked me about a book that may offer some meanings from a spiritual lens or spiritual perspective on the cards. So I thought I would make a video because I didn't have a book I could refer to her. So I thought I would go through the deck. So that's what's going to happen in this particular video. I'm just going to run through the deck, and the cards that I use or I feel have a spiritual lens or perspective or meaning or interpretation, I will share that for Christina. But for anybody else who's here who might find that of interest. So now let's get to the table and take a closer look at the deck that's going to be assisting me for this reading, and then we'll move into me sharing the meanings and interpretations that I use from a spiritual lens or perspective. And here we are with the cards on the table, and I've taken the liberty of separating the deck by suits. And so the deck that I'm going to be using for this video, which I think is appropriate given the context, is the Origins Shadow of History. This is by Rick Davidson. And what I love about this deck, in terms of the context, since we're talking about possible spiritual meanings you can derive from the cards, the jokers in this deck are Adam and Eve. So we have the red joker, which is Eve, and I'll hold it closer. And then the black joker is Adam. And then if you put them together, they form an image of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And I thought that was cool. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted the deck, because I liked the spiritual imagery within the cards. Another fun reason for this particular deck, and I'll hold it up, is that there are angels on the backs of the cards. And if you're no stranger to my videos, you know that I am an angel person. I love angels, so that's another plus for the deck. So that is the reason for the deck selection. And so now the reason why I have them in suits, or separated by suits I should say, is because I decided I was going to talk about them from the two suits that for me mostly have spiritual meanings that you can derive from them. Hearts as a suit represents God, and I get this from my favorite book on cartomancy, which I made a video about, and so I'll put a link to that particular video in the description box below if you have not seen that, because some of what I'm saying in this video will make sense if you check out that video. So in the Card Reader's Handbook by Regina Russell, she ascribes the suit of hearts to God, and I will say that not just Regina Russell, the three most important sources for me in terms of my own personal study and practice have been very beneficial and very helpful, has been, number one, Card Reader's Handbook, which I've already said. Number two, a book called It's Written in the Cards by Dr. Louis Martello. The book is out of print, but you can find source material on it online, so I will make a note of that and put that information in a description box as well, because like I said, the hard copy, print copy of the book is out of print. And it's very hard to find. If you were to find it, it would be very, very hard to find. And then third is a man who is named J. David Arcuri. He used to go by the handle of Caphorus. He has a blog called The Art of Cartomancy. And when I found him, I also discovered that he also follows the works of Martello and Russell. So his style is very similar. So the reason why I choose all three of those as my sources is because there's a lot of agreement among the three of them in terms of what the cards mean. So for me, it's like they share a common system. What you will find in most playing card or cartomancy material out there is that it seems like for every cartomancer, he or she has their own system. So it was very important for me when I was developing my practice that I found material where there was more agreement than not. So that's the reason why I go with this. So back to what I was saying about the suit of hearts. So the suit of hearts is the suit that represents God. And the suit of diamonds is the suit that represents spirit. So going back to the God, so this would be about God, the God of your understanding, because we all understand and perceive God to be different things for each of us, right? So God represents something different for each of us. So I always call it the God of your understanding, right? So it could also be about things having to do with healing, prayer, things like that. Now, the suit of diamonds, I said, is spirit, but it can also represent energy and things that we value. So in this particular context, this could be values in terms of a value system, like our spiritual values. It could also be like, what are we putting our energy into? And that could be spiritual energy too, right? So that would be the suit of diamonds. Next would be the suit of clubs. For me, the suit of clubs, if we're looking at it from a spiritual lens or a spiritual context, this is the suit of growth, because it represents growth and development. So this could be about, if you're asking about your growth and development, what kind of progress you're making, things of that nature. This would be about your progress and your growth, spiritually speaking, this suit. And then the last suit is the suit of spades. Now, spades in the spiritual context, according to Russell and Martello, talks about this idea about learning lessons through difficulties and challenging experiences, because this is the suit of problems, troubles, and challenges. So that is how you would learn. You also could learn about what you might need to eliminate or cut out or remove, because for me, the suit of swords, I said swords, excuse me, spades, I got tarot in my head. The suit of spades is all about cutting out, removal, elimination, those kinds of things, right? But it can also represent the mind. All right, so that is how I'm going to approach this. I'm going to take a look through each of the suits one by one, and I will share with you the meanings that I use from a spiritual context with those particular cards. All right, and I am back with the suit of hearts. And so starting off with the ace of hearts, for me, this suit, since it talks about God, and the ace of hearts, one of its meanings can represent a house or a home. Then if we put the God aspect of it and the house aspect together, this could represent the house of God. So that would be a church. It could represent a temple. It could represent a mosque. Wherever you would go to worship the God of your understanding, right? So it could represent the house of God. So moving on. Two of hearts. I don't really have a spiritual meaning for that card. So some of the cards I'm just going to go through and stop at the ones where I feel I have more of a spiritual meaning. But here we might talk about, your relationship with God, right? If the two, it represents relationships. This could be about a bond, connection, and I'm just talking about this out loud. A bond, a connection, then it would be your relationship or your connection to God, right? Next up, now, in a spiritual context for me, the Three of Hearts is a card that talks about, you are putting some time and energy into your own, either spirituality or religious understanding, right? There's some sort of spiritual or religious growth. You're looking more at the spiritual side of things. This, for me, is a card that can talk about cartomancy. So in that lens, this can be about divination. So working with divinatory tools, to further your own growth and development. But usually when this card comes up, it can talk about, exploring more of your spiritual side, maybe through a religious path, practice, or engaging in some sort of religious activity. So that is the Three of Hearts, Four of Hearts, Five of Hearts, Six of Hearts. Okay, I'm going to start with the Six of Hearts. Now, Six of Hearts is a card that can talk about karma. So karma can have some spiritual implications. So this could be about a karmic relationship, the repayment of a karmic debt, things like that. So that is what I would ascribe to the Six of Hearts. Oh, it's also a card where it talks about enlightenment, right? So it would be, excuse me if I can get the words out, it would be enlightenment through maybe a possible course of study, because this is known as a study card. So it could just be knowledge gained through study, but that would be languaged as enlightenment. So that would be the Six of Hearts. Now, Seven of Hearts. Okay, so now the sevens, for me, from a numerology standpoint, the 7 is a spiritual number, right? So here we have some emphasis on spirituality just with the number by itself. Now, the suit of hearts is also a suit of healing. So for me, the 7 of hearts would indicate spiritual healing. So this could be somebody who might be a hands-on spiritual healer. And then, now that I'm remembering, I'm going to go back to the 5 of hearts. So the 5 of hearts can be about hands-on healing, right? So here we have hands-on healing and then spiritual healing. So if these two cards were together, this could be modalities like Reiki, quantum touch, healing touch, things like that. It may be more traditional spiritual circles. This could be the laying of hands, that kind of thing. So I just remembered with the 5 of hearts that it can be representing hands-on healing. And so this would be about spiritual healing. The 8 of hearts. Now, one of the meanings I have for the 8 of hearts is that it can represent faith and trust. So in your relationship with God, now remember the suit of hearts is about God. So in your relationship with God, this card could turn up to suggest there may be a need for trust. There may be a need for optimism. So those would be two aspects of the 8 of hearts. Now, it can also, for me, represent a guardian angel. So this is my guardian angel card. So, and in that case, if you pull it, and let's say you're asking about a spiritual situation and it turns up, it could just represent that your guardian angel is watching out for you as the situation unfolds, right? So that's what I would see with that. Now, the 8, from a numerology standpoint, can also represent the infinite, right? Because it's a number that represents infinity, right? And so that the infinite is just another name for God. And so this could be about your relationship with the infinite. The 9 is the wish card in the deck. So here, from a spiritual standpoint, this might be talking about emotional satisfaction or attaining something, right? So since I'm talking about it meaning the wish card, this might mean like you might get a miracle, right? This could be like a miracle card, right? Because, sometimes getting your wish fulfilled is like a miracle, receiving a miracle. So I would say that maybe we could look at this as maybe a miracle card. Then we have the 10. Next we have the Jack. So Jacks, for me, in playing cartomancy, represent news and messages. That's one aspect of them. So this could represent, a spiritual message that you are receiving, and then other cards around it would give you a better idea as to what that message might be. You could use a directional cue and look to see where the Jack is facing or looking, and that might give you an idea of what the message is about. It could also represent somebody who's young. If we go with the idea that the Ace of Hearts can represent the house of God, this may be somebody who is young, coming up in the house of God. So this could be somebody who is, like maybe choir boy, altar boy, somebody who's young, because jacks can also represent children, so maybe somebody who's young coming up in the church. It could also be the child of, a pastor, reverend, minister, that kind of thing. So that would be the Jack of Hearts. Then we have the Queen of Hearts. She usually is the wife and mother, so one of her meanings could be that she could represent a woman of God. So this could be a woman who is married to a reverend, pastor, minister, or she is her own, in her own right, a pastor, minister, reverend, right? Now she could, if we go with the idea that the Ace of Hearts represents a church, she could be what's known as a spiritual mother in the church, meaning like everybody looks up to her, everybody reveres her, people come to her seeking guidance or advice, or maybe just some sort of caring and nurturing, because that would be her domain, right? So if she's not a clergy person herself, then she may be married to a clergy person and acting in that capacity within the church. So that would be the Queen of Hearts. And then the last card here in the suit is the King of Hearts. And so he would be the pastor, the minister, the reverend, because he would be a man of God, right? So it could also be the reverse. If the woman, the queen, is, let's say, heading up a church, then he would be her spouse, possibly, right? Now, going with the healing aspect, the king and the queen could also be spiritual healers, right? Or people who are very intuitive, right? If we go with the idea that the Three of Hearts earlier on was talking about divination and divinatory practices, then these might be people who are engaging in divinatory practices, right? So that they could be readers, they could be psychics, those kinds of things, right? So that is how I would derive spiritual meanings from the suit of hearts. And so now let's move on to the next suit, which would be the suit of diamonds. All right, and I am back with the suit of diamonds. And so now remember, for me, the suit of diamonds can represent spirit and spiritual energy, right? So first up is the Ace of Diamonds. So for me, this card can signify a ring. So it usually talks about commitment or engagement, symbolically speaking. So this card could be about your commitment to spirit, and it has the potential to be very valuable, very rewarding, or very enriching, right? So that's what I would see with the Ace of Diamonds from a spiritual lens. Two of Diamonds. And I'm going to go through the deck and just stop at the ones that really I feel have more of a spiritual influence or spiritual context for me. 4, 5, 6. Now, I'll stop with the 6, because this is also a card that can talk about the metaphysical or occult sciences. It's one of my meanings for it. So you could think about things like astrology, numerology. From a spiritual lens, it could also be spiritual psychology. This is a psychology card, things of that nature. And so it could be with the 6. The 6 here is about communication, so it could be communicating about those kinds of topics, right? So again, this is one of the cards that can represent things like astrology, numerology, any of the kind of metaphysical or esoteric sciences. So that is the 6 of diamonds for me. Then we have the 7. Now remember, the 7 is the most spiritual number out of all the numbers in the deck of cards. So here we have spiritual energy, right? So this would be about, putting your energy into your spirituality, right? So that is probably the chief meaning of this card that I would go with from a spiritual standpoint, And so how would you do that? So it might be about you engaging in things like meditation. The 7 is also a number that represents meditation. It represents self-awareness. It represents psychology. Just like the 6 of diamonds, one of its meanings is psychology, the 7 is also a number that represents psychology. So it could be about you investing energy or putting in energy and seeing what kind of return you get into your spiritual growth and development, but possibly through, things like meditation or contemplation, or some kind of practice that has a psychological component to it or bent to it, as well as the spiritual, right? Okay. So then here we have the Eight of Diamonds. Now, I will say with the Eight of Diamonds, for me, one of its meanings is that it can represent spectacles, like in glasses, right? So sometimes it can represent things having to do with sight and vision, right? So this could be about, possibly the energy of being clairvoyant, or, so the idea of like vision, second sight, those kinds of things. And I'm only saying that because of the fact that for me, the Eight of Diamonds, one of its meanings is that it can represent spectacles or glasses. So that would imply vision. Nine of Diamonds. Now this is actually a very spiritual card in this suit. It represents psychic ability. So that's one of its meanings for me. So if this card was coming up and you maybe were asking a question about, possible spiritual gifts, talents, or abilities, this card would represent psychic ability. And so how interesting is it that, it comes on the heels of the Eight of Diamonds, and one of its meanings is clairvoyance. If you were to get them together, it would suggest on some level being psychic, and maybe your primary or dominant mode is through clairvoyance, through seeing. So that is the Nine of Diamonds. And then next would be the Ten of Diamonds. The Ten of Diamonds has a spiritual meaning too, and one of its meanings in that regard is that it can represent communication with the spirit world, right? So this would be somebody who may be a channel or a psychic medium, things like that. But it's somebody who has the ability to communicate with spirit. Now, it can also represent moving higher up. So in a spiritual context, this could be like a form of ascension, like you see yourself ascending to some degree, or you see yourself progressing with your spiritual growth and development. And whatever the next level, quote unquote, in your growth and development would be, this card would be a signal that you could be moving towards that. But for me, the chief meaning of it is it can represent channeling or communication with the spirit world. Okay. Then we have the Jack of Diamonds, and so going with that, then this could be also a person who is a channel or a psychic medium, because remember now, Jacks are the messengers of the playing card deck for me. And so if we go with the idea that the suit of diamonds represents spirits, and this is about, either a spirit messenger, meaning that the person on this side of the physical world, because now remember the suit of diamonds represents the physical, the material, those kind of things. Then this could be representing somebody who's in the physical, who is a spiritual messenger, or that this could be a nod that you are receiving messages from spirits, right? Either the Great Spirit, which would be again the God of your understanding, is another name for God, or that you are talking to spirits. This could be about spirit guides, angelic beings, entities that are in the spirit world. This could even be people who have passed over, that kind of thing. Okay, so that would be the Jack of Diamonds. And then the Queen of Diamonds and the King of Diamonds, I really don't have spiritual meanings for those cards for me, because the suit of diamonds usually for me represents the more material, mundane aspect. So I tend to look at these as entrepreneurs, especially the King of Diamonds. Okay, so that would be how I would wrap up the suit of diamonds. And so now let's move on to the next suit. So now remember, we're moving through the suits from the suits that to me had more spiritual meanings for me, and personally, to the suits that don't have as much for me. So, but there are still some in there. So let's take a look, starting with the suit of clubs. All right, and we are back, starting with the Ace of Clubs from the suit of clubs. For me, this card usually talks about a building. That's one of its meanings. So if it came next to the Ace of Hearts, let's say, it would reinforce this idea about a house of God. Remember now I said the Ace of Hearts could represent the house of God. So this would be a larger building. So this could be like maybe like a mega church building kind of thing. So that's how I would look at the Ace of Clubs. Two of Clubs. Now, the Two of Clubs in a spiritual context could talk about gifts, because one of its meanings for me is gifts, right? So this could be like if somebody's exploring what their gifts are, you know, and how you could be of service, because that's another aspect. So this card talks about gifts and being of service. So you'd have to look at surrounding cards to maybe kind of elaborate more on what the gift or the service is. I tend to look at the suit of clubs representing work and business. So for me, this would be, you know, one's work or the service that they provide if they're a service provider, right? So there's that. Now, the Three of Clubs is a card that can talk about growth and development, because that's what the number 3 represents, excuse me. It talks about growth and development and increase and expansion. So this would be a card that would be talking about maybe you are starting to see some results of the work. Again, going with this idea that this represents a suit of work. So this would be work in the metaphorical sense, right? The things that you were taking action on or working towards, right? You might be seeing some fruits of your labor in that regard. The other thing I would say about the Three of Clubs, this is coming to me in the moment, this is a card for me that can represent training. So maybe in a spiritual context, this could turn up to say that you are going to be engaging in some kind of training. Next would be the Four of Clubs. And so this card, one of its meanings is a teacher. So this could represent a spiritual teacher. If you're doing a reading about spirituality and the context is on that subject, then this card could suggest a teacher. So that it could be you are a teacher, or that you are going to be engaging with a teacher, right? It could go one or two ways. But for me, this card can represent teaching. Now, because this card can also represent a car or a vehicle, then it could metaphorically be talking about your progress, right? Moving along. 5. Now, the 6. The 6 is a card that can represent books. So this could be about reading a book. So it might be about like you are being encouraged. If this card was to turn up in a reading for you, you're being encouraged to read a book that may have to do with a spiritual topic or is on a spiritual subject, right? There's that. It could also be a card going with the book symbolism or interpretation. It could also represent being a reader. So this is one of the cards for me that I look at. If it turns up, I may have a client reading I need to do, or someone may contact me about a reading, but this is the art or the act of reading, right? Now, if we go with the idea that the Four of Clubs was about being a teacher, then this card is about being a speaker. So this could be maybe a teacher who is giving a talk or a lecture or something of that nature, right? And then with the 4, the 6 emphasizes, you know, giving advice. So this could be a spiritual teacher or a speaker on a spiritual matter or topic who's giving advice. So that's how I would look at the 6 of Clubs. Next up, we have the 7 of Clubs. Now, for me, this would be about a spiritual-based business, because the suit of clubs is about work and business, and the 7 is a spiritual number, right? So with that in mind, this could be a spiritually based business that we're looking at, and then of course surrounding cards can give you more of an idea as to what that might be. One of its meanings is about putting your nose to the grindstone, right? So it could just be a matter of, like, if you are a spiritually based service provider or practitioner, then it might turn up to suggest that you have to really work at your business if you want it to succeed. And success is a relative thing, so you'd have to ask yourself, what would success mean to me in my spiritually based business? What would that look like? But this card would suggest working towards that. But for me, the chief meaning of it, it represents a spiritually based business. The 8. The 9. Now, the 9 has a spiritual meaning. One of its meanings is that it talks about your spiritual journey, right? So this could represent psychological journey, spiritual journey. Those are my 2 chief meanings for it. But it could also represent in terms of growth. Now remember, the suit of clubs is about growth and development. So if we're talking about growth, this represents like you've come a long way, right? Or that your growth and development has taken place over a long period of time. This is known as a time and distance card, right? So if reading it from a spiritual place, it will represent spiritual growth and development that has taken a long time, or it has happened over a period of time, or that you've come a long way. Now, the other thing in the spiritual context, this card could be about being nudged, gently nudged, to move in a new direction, like Spirit or God, the God of your understanding, is gently moving you into a new direction. So those are the meanings that I would have for the 9 of clubs. Then 10. Then we have the Jack. So now remember, the Jack is a news and messenger. Here, this could be somebody who delivers news to the public, because the suit of clubs can also represent something having to do with society or being social or the public. So this could be public news or a public message. So this could be a message for the masses, right? So somebody who delivers a message for a large group of people, right? So again, that could be a nice way of coming back to the clergy person or the clergy people that we've talked about with the previous suits, right? So there's that. Then we have the Queen and the King. Now, these two people usually for me represent people who are of help, right? So this could be, if we go with the idea that this represents work and business and possibly service, and this would be people who are very helpful. And so this could be like a person who may be an assistant to maybe a clergy person. And that would be both for the Queen and the King, because they represent people who are very helpful to others. So that's how I would look at the suit of clubs. And so now let's round this out by taking a look at the suit of spades. And here we are with the suit of spades. And so, as I alluded to earlier in this video, I don't ascribe too many spiritual meanings to this particular suit. So we may go through it rather quickly. First up, we have the Ace of Spades. And so this is probably one of the cards in this particular suit that I would probably have a lot more spiritual connotation or emphasis on than the rest. This card can represent transformation because it's known as the Death card. I don't tend to read it as death per se, but death is a process of change, but it's also a transition. It's also a transformative process. So for me, from a spiritual context, this card would represent all those kinds of things, like a transition, making a transition, going through a challenging experience potentially, because remember now, the suit of spades is all about challenges and obstacles and blocks and problems, right? So there may be a challenge that has the potential within it to be very transformative in terms of this next aspect. The Ace of Spades for me can represent the mind. So for me, usually represents the mind and needing to make a decision when it turns up. With that aspect, this card for me can represent the renewal of your mind, right? So it could be, transforming the way you think, so this could be receiving an epiphany, a revelation, an aha moment, that kind of thing. But it sparks, a new way of thinking, and as a result of that, it leads you to rebuild your life, and that would be the transformative process, right? So that is what I would say about the Ace of Spades. Then we have the Two of Spades, Three of Spades. I'm going to stop here. Now, this is a card that talks about creativity. For me, this is an artist card, right? So the 3 is a number of creativity and creative self-expression. And I didn't say this with the 3 of clubs that appeared with the previous suit, the suit of clubs. That card, the 3 of clubs, can represent writing, whereas the 3 of spades can represent artistic pursuits, So this could be somebody who is doing artwork that has a spiritual bent or flavor to it, whereas the 3 of clubs would be about, maybe spiritual or inspirational writing. So that is what I would say about the 3 of spades. Then we have the 4 of spades. Then we have the 5 of spades. 6 of spades. I will stop here. One of this meanings of the Six of Spades is this is known as fate, but it's also a card that talks about progress. So I would put that, so if you believe in fate, you subscribe to fate, that is potentially one of the meanings of this card. But it can also represent, progress. So if this was to turn up, it would say on some level you are making progress, right? So that's one positive aspect of this card. Then we have the suit of spades. Okay, the seven of spades, excuse me. So again, now remember, the seven is a number of spirituality in and of itself. With the spades, it could represent spiritual challenges, spiritual difficulties, spiritual tests, like your faith is being tested to some degree. And as advice, this card talks about, needing to have faith, to keep your faith. So when the seven of spades comes up, that would be the advice it wants to offer you. Like, keeping your faith, holding on to your faith, those kinds of things. And it would suggest too, like, whatever your spiritual teachings are, or the spiritual teachings that you live by, the suit of spades in this regard would be suggesting, like, it's important for you to lean on those teachings when you are facing adversity, right? And so that's what I would say about the seven of spades especially. Okay. Next we have the eight of spades. So this card for me can represent the head. So it might be ways of thinking, in terms of spirituality. So that would make sense in terms of maybe powerful ideas or strong ideas, or you becoming aware of how strong the mind is. If you subscribe to the idea that thought creates experience, then this card would suggest on some level be very mindful, pun not intended, about the power of your mind, right? So this could be the power of your mind, the power of thinking, right? The nine of spades, 10 of spades. Then we have the jack of spades. So now the jacks, remember, are all about news and messages. So for me, this could be about a message maybe that might help you move through a particularly challenging experience, right? Or it could be a message about what you might need to eliminate or remove that maybe is creating a block or an obstacle that's, tripping you up, or, is kind of metaphorically blocking your path, that kind of thing. Next we have the queen, and so I'll put the queen and the king together. For me, these two cards usually represent somebody who is single. So this could be somebody who's separated, somebody who's divorced, somebody who's widowed. But going with that in mind, this could represent a nun, and this could represent a priest. Maybe people who have chosen, in terms of lifestyle, to devote themselves to God or to spirit. And so, they've decided to become a nun or a priest, right? So that's what I would see with these two cards in the spiritual context, right? So that is the suit of spades. And so wrapping up this video, I thought I was going to wrap up here, but then I'm feeling like I want to talk about the jokers, so I will do that in the next segment. And here we are with the two jokers that I talked about at the opening of this video. So I just want to touch on them here. I am a person who uses the jokers in the deck, and so at some point I will probably make a video about that if people are interested in seeing how that plays out. But what I do is that I subscribe meanings to them. And so if you are tarot fluent, this may be helpful. What I do with the red joker, so in this particular case, the red joker has Eve on it. So for me, I would read this card much like I would read the Fool in tarot. So this could represent, being at a crossroads, or starting off on a new journey in life. If we're talking about spirituality, this will be about a new phase in your spiritual growth and development, or your spiritual journey, that kind of thing. And then with the tree in the imagery here, so the tree could represent growth and development in and of itself, but also growth and development over time, because trees take time to grow, right? And so with that in mind, it could be, a need to either learn or develop patience, right? But it could also be talking about the metaphorical seeds that you are planting or planting and see how they would grow and develop over time. But my chief meaning is I would read her like the Fool. So again, this would be about, being at a crossroads in life, embarking on a journey, whether it's literal or metaphorical, but a new phase of life opening up. Now, the other thing here with this particular deck, I can use this as a significator card. So this could represent a woman who's having her cards read, right? So that would be the red joker. Oh, the other thing about it from a spiritual standpoint, she can also represent the subconscious mind. So this could be engaging in things like dreams, which is very much dealing with the messages that your subconscious mind is trying to convey. So that is another aspect. So she would represent the subconscious mind. Okay. Moving to the black joker, which is Adam. So here I would read this card as like the Tower. So if this is the Fool, this is the Tower. So if you're Tower fluent, the Tower usually represents some kind of shakeup. That's the chief meaning of the black joker for me, is a shakeup, right? So something's happening that is shaking things up for you, and usually the shakeup is suggesting that you have become complacent to some degree and that something needs to change, but you have not been willing to make any kind of change in maybe a particular area regarding your spiritual growth and development. So the universe creates situations to help foster that shift for you, right? So that's usually the big chief meaning, is a shakeup. Now, since this has a man on the card, whereas Eve represents your subconscious mind, or subconscious awareness, then the man represents your conscious mind and conscious awareness, right? Two aspects of mind, right? We have our subconscious mind, or our intuitive emotional nature, and then masculine energy, which would be our conscious mind, and our intellectual nature, right? And then the coming together, right? There's a union between the two, right? And also, too, since I'm looking at this, and this is Adam and Eve, the story being that Eve came from Adam, right? Came from one of his ribs. So that just lets us know that we are both masculine and feminine, right? Metaphysically speaking, right? That our intuitive nature is a very important part of us, right? And it works together with our conscious mind, our intellectual nature, right? And it reminds me of an expression that I learned from Unity. So Unity is a spiritual movement that I've been involved in for a very long time. And we have what's known as the Unity 5 principles. And principle number 3 is thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. And so I tend to think of that principle with these two cards. So that's how I read the jokers in the deck. So like I said, at some point I probably will make a video and elaborate more on that. But that is the short and sweet of it. And on that note, I will go ahead and end this video here. So for Christina, I hope you found this helpful because you were looking for information about how to read the cards or what possible spiritual meanings they would have. So this is just my take on it. I'm sure just as there are a number of readers, other readers may have more meanings to add or look at some of the cards in different ways, but this is how I choose to read them. So again, I hope that was helpful. This is James and Mitchell wrapping up, and I want to thank you for sharing the space here with me for this video, and I look forward to sharing the same space with you again at some point in the future in another video. And until then, I hope you're having a wonderful day, and take care.